Good evening, everybody. I'm Nancy Gale, the Executive Director of Jewish Residential Services, and welcome to our panel discussion on disability rights and the power of advocacy. We have a great lineup this evening, and we're very excited about it. I do want to mention this session is being recorded, and captioning is also available. So if you're looking for that, you would click the CC/live transcript at the bottom of your screen to access it. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We ask that everyone keep themselves on mute unless they're a speaker, in which case we want them to unmute themselves. And if you have a question for one of our panelists, you can put it in the chat at any time. And during the question and answer session, if you have a question, you can use the raise your hand feature and speak when you are recognized. So I want to introduce our moderator, Judy Cohen. Judy is a past president of JRS and very much an advocate in her own right. She is going to introduce our speakers and moderate the Q&A at the end. So Judy, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Nancy, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation with three amazing advocates, and I'm excited to introduce them. I think each of them brings a very unique perspective to this evening's topic on disability rights and the power of advocacy. So the format for the evening is I'm going to first introduce all three of our speakers, then each is going to speak about their experiences as advocates on behalf of people with disabilities, as well as issues that we all should be aware of that impact people with disabilities. And as Nancy mentioned, that'll be followed by some Q&A, but if you want to capture your questions in chat as the speakers are talking, that is absolutely fine, and we'll keep tabs of that. And then the meeting is scheduled to go to a little bit after 8 o'clock, or right on the dot if we can do it, because for those of you who are Steelers fans, we are well aware that there is a game at 8:15 tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers. So our speakers tonight include Aaron Kaufman, who is the Senior Manager of Legislative Affairs for the Jewish Federations of North America's Washington, D.C. office, focusing on disability and poverty issues. Living with cerebral palsy, Aaron brings a very unique perspective to JFNA's efforts on behalf of people with disabilities. He is on the executive committee of the Jewish Foundation for Group Homes and is the former vice chair of the Maryland Developmental Disabilities Council. He also served on the board of the National Association of Developmental Disabilities Councils, as well as the board of Disabilities Rights Maryland. And in his previous position at the ARC of Maryland, he lobbied Maryland state legislators on issues affecting Marylanders with intellectual disabilities and their families. We also have Laura Cherner here tonight. She is the director of the Community Relations Council, better known as the CRC, at the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh. In that role, she acts as a liaison from the Jewish community to the broader community, and her work focuses on being an advocate and facilitator of interfaith and intergroup collaboration, social justice, government relations, and combating anti-Semitism. And we also have Dr. Josie Badger. She is the founder of J. Badger Consulting, Inc., where she provides youth development and disability consulting services for organizations on transition and leadership development. She is also the director of the National Rehabilitation Service Administration's Parent Training and Information Center's Technical Assistance Center, otherwise known as RAISE, which provides support to individuals with disabilities as they transition into adulthood. She is the campaign manager of the United Way of Southwestern PA's #IWantToWork campaign, which works to improve the employment of people with disabilities, is a field organizer for the Family Care Act that supports paid family leave, and is the developer of TRAIL, a statewide advocacy and lobbying training program. So as you can hear, we have a fantastic panel with us tonight. They each are bringing, as I say, unique perspectives. Aaron's going to be our first speaker, and he will spend some time answering the following questions. He's going to share a bit about his work, what he does, how his personal experience informs his work, and how can we as average people, if you will, play a role in advocacy for disability rights? And what are some national issues that we should educate ourselves about that are most urgent in the next 6 to 8 months? So I am going to turn it over to Aaron, and he's going to speak first. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judy, for that very kind introduction. And I must have forgotten Nancy Gale's birthday, because only if I had forgotten her birthday would I have to be followed by these two extraordinary women that will be behind me, and they will blow you away, and you'll say, what's the name of that schmo from out of town again? But I'll do my best. And I just want to say very brief, and because Josie did an extraordinary job testifying before the Senate Aging Committee, I'll actually reference her testimony as part of my talk, because I'm a bit of a nerd that way. And my wonderful friend Laura Cherner does such an extraordinary job for you at the CRC. I love all my colleagues, but Laura is one of the best. And beyond that, and what's more important to me, is obviously she's good at her job, which is important, but Laura is just a fundamentally decent human being and a very kind person. Plus, she's a really good friend, because next time, she knows what a sports fan I am. So she says when I get up to Pittsburgh next time, she's going to take me to a sporting event. So I look forward to that. But for me, disability advocacy is, yes, I'm the dreaded L word, I'm a lobbyist. But for me, disability advocacy is more than just a paycheck, because, as was said, I have cerebral palsy, and I use a walker to get around, and I have associated learning and visual disabilities. I'm also, in addition, having CP, what you call in today's world, something that sounds rather egotistical, but is what it's called, twice exceptional, because I have a high IQ, but also I also have significant learning disabilities, and I have some visual impairment as well. And so a lot of people will ask me, maybe Josie has a different take than I do, but a lot of people will ask me, aren't you glad you have a disability? And I will be honest with them, and I will say, absolutely not. But it gave me a purpose in life. I'd much rather, be able to walk and not have all my adversity that I must overcome on a daily basis. But it gave me a purpose, and it also gave me perspective that things could be a lot worse off. For example, my brother is an amazing person, but he has cerebral palsy too. We're not twins, it was just bad luck. And he needs assistance with all activities of daily living, showering, shaving, dressing, eating, etc. And he has an intellectual disability. And I'm the secretary of the board of a very similar organization called the Jewish Foundation for Group Homes, based in Rockville, Maryland. And so I really came into this because having a disability can be frustrating and can be upsetting. But what I really found out, and I say this half in jest, is that advocacy is a lot cheaper than therapy. And what I mean by that is that it can be really frustrating and depressing to have a disability, but you got to channel that energy somewhere. And I chose to channel it to do disability advocacy. And I also, one of the reasons that I do disability advocacy is I really like to bust myths about people with disabilities, because most people without disabilities feel that people with disabilities can achieve in one of the 4 F's, and that's what they're limited to. For example, food, flowers, filth, and filing. And I can see the anonymous memos I'm going to get about my son has a job at the Giant Eagle as a bagger and he loves it. Well, God bless them. That's not a bad job, but we need to have a broader horizon. And the other thing, and then I'll get to the legislation in a couple of minutes. The other thing I just wanted to say is that people automatically talk to me like I'm 5, perhaps they do to Josie as well. And, Josie complimented me ahead of time about, we were schmoozing ahead of time, and she said, you have a good vocabulary. Well, you kind of have to when you have a disability, because you want people to know, yeah, I may not be able to walk well or walk with a walker, but I'm smart. And, I've had, because the other thing I just wanted to say is that, because people, when I tell them I graduated from the University of Maryland, they say, oh, God bless you. What an inspiration. And I say, thank you very much. But everyone this evening, I must say that it's very flattering that so many people, this sounds pompous, but I'm referring to what other people say about me. It's very flattering that people say that I am their inspiration, but it's a burden, because sometimes you just want to blow your stack, and that's not really inspiring. Or and people put people with disabilities and their supposed interests in a box because of the fact that they assume certain things about people with disabilities. Like that, so many times when I'm with able-bodied friends, the people will talk to able-bodied friends and not to me. Or something that struck me in Josie's testimony before the Senate Aging Committee was that she said that she and her partner bought a house as part of her ABLE account. And I thought to myself, there's going to be some senators up there that can't fathom that people with disabilities want romance and intimacy and all of those things, because again, people with disabilities couldn't possibly be interested in those things. So what I love about my job is that I bust myths. And I also think I bring a unique credibility to the work, because I was a special education student and a special education teacher. And I know a lot of people on Medicaid. I know people on SSI. So it's not abstract. I often use my own life as a teaching tool, because many people, I know more about disability policy than many of the 20 somethings that staff congressional offices. That sounds mean, but it's just the truth. And so I think I bring a unique credibility to the work. And I just love getting to stand up and fight for my people every day. And there's never been a better time to be a disability lobbyist, because we are in the prefaces of something historic, and that is a record investment in home and community-based services. Now, if you're not a Washington nerd like me, you may be saying, well, what's that, Aaron? But it's some of the very services that the wonderful Nancy Gale and JRS provide. Things like assistance with showering, shaving, dressing, eating, job coaching, transportation assistance. But it's chronically underfunded. For example, in the great state of Pennsylvania, HCBS provider rates haven't been raised in 10 years. And you may say, oh, Aaron, how do you know that it's chronically underfunded? I know it's chronically underfunded because there are over 16,000 people in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania on the waiting list for services, for HCBS services. When I used to work at the ARC, I'll never forget this call I got where this woman said, I just got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, and I have 6 months to live, but I have a son who doesn't communicate through his mouth. Other people may say nonverbal. And I tried to get him off the waiting list yesterday with the Maryland Department of Health, and they told me in order for my son to get placed in a group home, I'll have to die first, then he'll be deemed homeless, and then he can get in. So that's what drives me. And so it's the investment in HCBS of $150 billion would help people like Mrs. Nava, the woman I spoke to. And it would also allow 40,000 family caregivers to go back to work, because I know it was a constant struggle for my parents to balance taking my brother and me to all of our 82 medical appointments and working at the same time trying to put food on the table. We also know that it's going to create 19,000 jobs for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So it's very, very, very exciting. And what jazzes me the most about this, the $150 billion part of the budget reconciliation Build Back Better agenda, is 120,000 Pennsylvanians who don't have HCBS currently will have it. And that's very important because in her testimony, Josie talked about how her HCBS is critical for her and how people wouldn't necessarily be able to realize what a badass woman, wonderful professional she is without HCBS services. And many people, if this passes, will have the HCBS services they need to show off their talents. And so, but first, what I ask you is to please just give Bob Casey a big hug the next time when you see him. He and both of your senators are decent men, but there's nobody better on disability policy in the United States Senate today than Bob Casey. And he's the lead sponsor of this legislation. And he and Debbie Dingell, a member of the House of Representatives from Michigan, a Democrat, have carried the water on this so much. Also, if you know anybody in West Virginia, please have them contact Senator Manchin, because whether or not this reconciliation bill gets through will be dependent on whether Senator Manchin puts his thumb up, as they do, to vote yes in the Senate, or thumbs down to vote no, because it's a 50-50 Senate. And to have Kamala Harris break the tie, you need all 50 Democrats. Let me quickly move to the other piece of legislation that I want to talk about. How am I doing on time?
I think you're doing pretty good.
Okay, I want to talk briefly about two other bills before and if you have insomnia this evening, because my discussion of Washington idiosyncrasies was so boring that you're having trouble falling asleep. Laura, I sent my wonderful friend Laura Cherner 2 issue briefs. So if you need to fall asleep quickly, feel free to read what was sent out. Another thing that really excites me is that many of my friends are on this program called SSI, Supplementary Security Income. And it's good because it provides them Medicaid, but they are forced to live in poverty to get that essential Medicaid, because once you're eligible for SSI, you are automatically eligible for Medicaid. But the problem is, I'm not a young man, but I was too the last time the asset limits for SSI were raised. And in 1989, that was $2,000. So if you are a single person, you can have more than $2,000 in your bank account to get SSI. And if you are a married person, you get a whopping $3,000 before they start cutting back or terminating your benefits. And what the bill would do, and so you're really, really living in poverty, but you need to keep SSI often to keep your Medicaid, because personal care attendants will wipe you out. So what Senator Sherrod Brown and Representative Rahul Grijalva have decided to do is introduce the SSI Restoration Act, whereby they will make the annual, the monthly benefit, which is I think about $894 right now. They will index it to 100% of the federal poverty level, and then they will index it to inflation after that. Then they will also raise the asset limit from to 10,000 for an individual and 20,000 for a couple, and index that to inflation. And I should say, just to cover my tush, that JFNA has not taken a position on it yet. I just thought it would be a bill that you would want to know. And then another important provision is, let's say I crash, Laura said, I know you're in between looking for places, Aaron, you can crash on my couch for a month. Well, under SSI, if I were on SSI, that's a very generous offer for Laura to make, but that counts as income. So the bill would take care of what they call would allow people to couch surf without penalties. And if you get married because again, we like to have relationships too. You get 25% benefit reduction because you need less, they say. But the problem is that people with disabilities, since the program started in 1972, which was way before I was even an embryo, the cost of living has increased 5.5%. So, so it's really would take SSI into the 21st century. Now, the problem is, my friends, that bipartisanship is 97% dead, in my view. And that's why I believe strongly in the phrase on the back of our money, in Xanax we trust. But the fact is that those are two very good bills, but they're not bipartisan because of ideological differences about government spending and the social safety net. But my final bill that I'm going to talk about is the Able Age Adjustment Act, which is also sponsored by your amazing senior senator, which would enable people like me, but who got their disability later in life, be it a soldier who lives in Scranton, or a spinal cord injury victim who got a spinal cord injury from surfing at 28, lived in Pittsburgh, to open up an ABLE account because of the fact that right now you have to have acquired your disability prior to your 26th birthday. And otherwise you're out of luck, because an ABLE Act is really key. ABLE Age Adjustment Act is really key. Because remember, I just told you about those draconian limits on SSI? Well, you can get around those through an ABLE account. And we know it's very beneficial because I'm not revealing anything private, because in the sworn testimony, Josie talked about how her and her partner bought a house with the help of an ABLE account. But if I'm a soldier coming back from war and I step on an IED at age 28, or I have MS or ALS, which tend to come later in life, I'm really out of luck. So we're pushing very hard for that bill. Then I just want to make a commercial for Jewish Disability Advocacy Day. It's actually 2 days, on February 22nd. This is what happens when it's 7 o'clock at night. 23rd and 24th, all virtually, so you all can participate. And I just want to also say, just so you get one more sense of what it's like to live with a disability, there's some added pressure when you're one of the few people with a disability in an office, because the fact that you're in your head, your self-tape recorder is telling you all the time, you better not screw this up, because if you do, they'll never hire somebody with a disability again. So there's a lot of added pressure. And so just living with a disability and people's asinine comments that they've given me, like, can I pray to heal you? If you believed in Jesus Christ, you could walk, etc., is hard enough. But these pieces of legislation will help make life better for people with disabilities, and particularly with the HCBS provision of the Build Back Better Act could result in more clients for wonderful agencies like JRS as they empty the waiting list. So I talked long enough, but I cannot wait to hear what my wonderful friend Laura has to say. I just thought of one last thing, and that is that Senator Toomey is retiring, and Senator and Connor Lamb is seeking the Senate seat, and wonderful Mr. Doyle is retiring after a long time, co-chair of the Autism Caucus. So one of the things Nancy asked me to do is talk about what you could do. And you could go to a candidates forum and ask the candidates, regardless of party, about disability issues and where they stand on it. Because I will tell you, these issues are very important to Laura, Josie, and me, and many of you, but they don't get the same amount of oxygen, say, as critical race theory or other things that are in the paper every day. So I urge you to use all the vacancies you have to tell whether it's Democrat or Republican that disability matters to you. Thank you all very, very much.
Wow, Aaron, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your personal story and for also giving us very concrete things to think about with this legislation. So on that note, I will turn it over to Laura. And she's also going to share a little bit about what she does, what the CRC does, what the Jewish Federation's role is in disability advocacy, and some local issues, if there are any, that we should be focusing on. So turn it over to you, Laura.
Can you hear me? Sorry, I think I froze at the worst possible time, but thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be on this panel with Aaron and Josie. It's, as much as I love seeing Aaron, it's so hard to follow him. So that's my one criticism of this, and I'll keep it brief because I'm really excited to hear from Josie. But so I'll just give a brief overview of kind of what I do and what the CRC does. So I'm the director of the Community Relations Council. And basically what that is that the CRC, Community Relations Council, is comprised of about 20 lay leaders. And so our agenda, for the most part, is really driven by them and their expertise, their passion, their vision. I see at least one member of the CRC on this call, so thank you, Cindy. But it really is we really have 4 areas of focus if we're going to whittle it down into categories. The primary focus, I would say, is combating anti-Semitism. And so that could mean taking on an individual case of anti-Semitism and advising on what kind of a resolution might look like, education of schools. We've had issues recently of swastikas popping up in middle schools, and like what role does CRC play when it comes to advocacy for that. Another component is our interfaith and diverse community relationship building. So the CRC really being that voice of the Jewish community and connecting with diverse communities to build coalitions and relationships. And that's a really key component of the work that the CRC does. Another aspect is social justice, and I think that definitely informs a lot of the advocacy work. So LGBTQ inclusion, criminal justice, disability advocacy, that all kind of falls under the CRC umbrella. And then finally, government relations. So that can be engaging at the local level, the federal level, and that's another key component of advocacy when it comes to disability inclusion. So in terms of what is the Federation's role, I think that primarily the Federation has a really unique opportunity as role of convener in the Jewish community, but also by virtue of the deep connections that we have with non-Jewish community stakeholders. So part of that responsibility as convener and leader is to first, examine your own practices and make sure that you are fostering an inclusive culture before you're trying to model for other communities and for other organizations. Actually, I think it was a couple of years ago, we committed to like a year-long inclusive effort called Rosh Pina, where we kind of did a deep dive into every aspect of our organization to make sure that we were instituting inclusive practices. I should mention that standards and practices are evolving all of the time as we are centering voices of people with disabilities more and more. So just because you did it 4 years ago doesn't mean that you're done. I would definitely recommend always kind of revisiting these concepts. So, that's one aspect of the Federation, but also using that platform that we have as convener and as someone who has relationships with these key stakeholders to advocate for key legislation. Part of that is working very closely with JFNA. So essentially, Aaron tells me what to do and I do it. So he mentioned a lot about Senator Casey. So really following up with that office, offering support with Senator Toomey as well, but also on more of a local level. That relationship with JFNA is really key. I will also do a plug for JDAD in terms of how the community wants to be involved, I think JDAD is a really great way for Pittsburghers to gather together if you want to lobby, if you want to get in front of our elected officials and say, this is really important to me. The Pittsburgh community feels really strongly about this key piece of legislation. JDAD is a really great opportunity to, as a community, as Pittsburgh, to come together and get in front of your elected officials and feel like you're a part of something. So I will also plug JDAD. In terms of like maintaining the key relationships with the elected officials, Aaron definitely talked about this, but we're really lucky to have Senator Casey because he is an incredibly supportive elected official. Over the summer, he introduced the legislation to support home and community-based services. In the past, PA has also received federal dollars to support the Money Follows the Person grant. And an element of that is supporting employment opportunities for people with disabilities. But I think, with this and other broad legislation like the American Disabilities Act, or even the IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disability Education Act, while these are great pieces of legislation, oftentimes the issue is enforcement. So, passing it is just one piece of the puzzle, but ensuring that these things continue to have funding or making sure that they're enforced is a key component of advocacy. It just doesn't stop when legislation is passed. So, making sure that you are using your voice to advocate that, this good legislation is actually being put into use, I think is a really important element. One of the things that I mentioned before is that standards and best practices are always evolving and changing over time as we learn more and as we are centering voices more. And so advocacy doesn't necessarily have to just look like legislation. When I think of advocacy, I think, oftentimes we want to go to the place of like, oh, there's this piece of legislation I'm advocating on Capitol Hill or I'm advocating in Harrisburg. But I kind of view advocacy also to just be using your voice. And one, self-education is a really important piece of that, but also, calling it out when you see a gap in inclusion and trying to be a part of positive change. So on the local level, at your synagogue, at your place of business, is it accessible? With COVID-19, we've seen so many gaps as a community where accessibility and inclusion, we could be doing more. Does your Zoom meeting have closed captioning? Like things like that you may not consider, but are a really important part about fostering an inclusive community. Like those are things that we need to consider when we're talking about advocacy. In terms of other local things, at the state level, a lot of advocacy looks like litigation, like I said about like the enforcement, or there are a lot of different networks and organizations. There's the Disability Rights Network of Pennsylvania, the Disability Rights Advocacy Group, the Pennsylvania Department on Aging. These are all like really important resources. But I would also recommend, if you're interested in learning more, would be to go on the Allegheny County website or the City of Pittsburgh website. There's a city-county task force on disabilities. It'll be really interesting to see with the new Gainey administration where disability advocacy lies in the cabinet, or if that's identified as a priority. And we as community members can be a part of advocating for that to make sure that's a priority in the administration. That's something, I think is really important when there is a change of power. Other local organizations, JRS is a wonderful resource, a wonderful service provider who's helping to convene this. I can't recommend looking on their website and engaging with Allison, Nancy on these issues. That's also, something that you can do locally. And if there's an interest in like about specific organizations, there are several. I think, one that comes to mind would be Achieva. Achieva has really helpful advocacy toolkits on their website. So I mentioned before about COVID-19 and, adapting practices. They have a 2020 guide on transition back to school. Like if you don't know where to begin as a school or an administrator, as a parent, they have a lot of really helpful resources there. They also have a language guide. Like I'm someone who thinks that language is really important. And like I said, it's always evolving and it's personal. So is person first language best? Is it not for that person? Like, it's good to brush up on these things and make sure that you are being intentional about the language that you're using. I think that's, an incredibly important part of advocacy. So I think, I'll stop there, like just to give like a broad sense of what the CRC does, but also some things that are happening locally. It's always evolving, but we do work closely with JRS, with JFNA to kind of inform the advocacy that we do locally. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions in the chat or afterwards. I can share my email and happy to get people involved on the local level.
Thank you, Laura, so much. And thanks for giving us some very practical things to do, which I'm going to sum up after we hear from Josie, because I know she's going to have some very practical things for us as well. So Josie is going to tell us a little bit about herself, her advocacy work in the community, as well as her self-advocacy, her perspective on what it takes to be a successful advocate and some of the challenges with that. So thank you, Josie, and take it from here.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's so great to see everyone tonight. So I'm kind of chuckling to myself that, like, I feel like Aaron stole all my thunder. Like, he's like, and this is what Josie thinks. And I'm like, what? What do I say now? So that's okay. I really appreciate it, Aaron. I would love to partner with you on some lobbying work because I too am one of those scary L words, a lobbyist. And I too nerd out over this stuff. So something that I particularly work on is empowering young adults with disabilities to find their voice, because those of us with disabilities and youth have often been told repeatedly that we're broken, there's something wrong with us. As Aaron said, if we prayed harder, if we had the faith of a mustard seed, we'd be walking around. And so many of us, from therapies, from treatment, from doctors to special ed, we have been told repeatedly that there is something essentially wrong with our being. And I believe that we were woven together in our mother's wombs and that we are who we should be. And that thus we need to be sharing our voices and perspectives and be at the table. I'm going to be very honest that I envy the inclusion and the lobbying realms of the Jewish faith. In Christianity, we tend to steer clear of that, and I don't think that's right. And you guys just have such a powerful voice, and so it is obviously an honor to be chatting with all of you. I have a puppy who thinks it's playtime, and so if you hear her, she is lobbying also. I've taught her that well, that I should be playing with her and not talking to you. So, and I also got a head cold, so forgive me. But I think that something we all need to do, whether we're a kid, a young adult, an adult, is periodically check in with everyone here with us and see if you all are awake. Okay, so in the chat box, if you're able, I want you to put whether you prefer, this is totally not lobbyist of me, pumpkin spice or hot cider. Okay, this is just to get you guys reconnected. Pumpkin spice or hot cider? Hot cider, I'm seeing it. Good work, guys. I have to say, I go back and forth. If it's like before 10 a.m., I'm all about the pumpkin spice coffee. But after that, cider, I'm feeling it. So, okay, so growing up, I think that it's often easier for us to advocate for others more than it is to advocate for ourselves. It is really hard to be vulnerable. It is really hard to say, hey, I need help. And like Aaron, I was a dual IEP individual with both special ed for disability and for giftedness. And let me tell you, if you've ever endured the lovely hours of IEP meetings, just double them and you can have twice the fun. And I didn't go to my IEP meetings, and I tell youth every single day, you should go to your IEP meetings because all I ever heard was Josie doesn't do this well, Josie doesn't do that well. Never once did I hear how do we make Josie better at what she is already gifted at. And I believe every one of us has gifts. And so that is where a lot of my work has come into play. I believe that we all should have justice, and I'm talking about a free, full range of opportunities. So I'm not saying everyone has to work in the same jobs. I'm not saying everyone should have to go to higher education. That is up to each person, but that they should all have the right to choose. And that comes from marriage equality as well. We don't in America have marriage equality, just as Aaron said. We have a system that is outdated, that defines disability based on our ability to make money rather than our needs in order to be fully thriving citizens, capable of love and making money and owning homes and having 3 dog children, all of those things. And so that is where all of you, all of us sitting here today come into play. We can talk about every single bill we want to. And probably Aaron and I could sit here and do that for hours ad nauseum. But if we're not bringing people with disabilities to the table, it doesn't matter. We have talked about the disability community forever. When we even mentioned the disability community, and that's a big assumption when, but we very rarely brought us to the table to make those decisions. And so I believe that as a leader, our jobs are to make other leaders. And so that is where I charge all of you. All of you came here tonight seeking some sort of knowledge or understanding about advocacy, about lobbying. And I would say, yes, I want you here, but I want you to bring the people you're thinking of right now to this table. I want those people to know their stories matter, that sometimes that's the only thing that matters when talking to a legislator. Yes, they want numbers, they want price tags, but they want to know real life situations. I've had, sorry, this is Millie. She's a baby. Hi, Millie. And so there are individuals, legislators who I've developed awesome relationships with, who voted maybe in a destructive manner for our community, but had no idea that they were. They had no idea why not increasing the income and pay for personal care attendants mattered. They didn't understand why putting lifetime caps on insurance mattered. They had no idea. And what it took was people with disabilities at the table making a difference and speaking for themselves. And so I've had the unbelievable honor and privilege of working on specifically 4 bills. The first one was workforce opportunities for high school students with disabilities, followed by employment first, followed by medical assistance for workers with disabilities, workers with job success, and now I'm working on paid leave, both at the state and federal level. The 3 state bills that I talked about, we got passed unanimously. There was not one dissenting vote, even though there was a price tag attached to each one of these. That's not something that we hear often. We are primarily a Republican legislator with a Democratic governor right now. And when it came down to it, in our experience looking at employment bills for people with disabilities, it came down to the fact that we are the largest minority in the world and the highest unemployment rates. That means that literally we are the largest tapped employment labor force that there is. And that makes sense to everyone, that people should have the right to work, to be employed, and to pursue their dreams. And so it's been such an honor and privilege to do all of that. And just to wrap this up, because I know that there were some time for Q&A that we hope to do at the end. Growing up, I had no role models with disabilities. I was ashamed of my disability. And I thought that success meant not being disabled. And so I did everything that I could to not look disabled. I failed dramatically, but I tried. What I didn't realize was that my success came through those disadvantages, those differences. And I needed to know that. I needed to know my disability gave me an edge that other people couldn't get. But now it's time to do all these things that Aaron had mentioned and Laura had mentioned of let's make sure people with disabilities don't lose their Medicaid. Let's make sure that they can save more than a couple $1,000s and have a job and not worry about losing the support that allows them to get up in the morning every single day. So now it's up to you guys, no pressure, but it's up to all of you to who are you going to bring to the table with you. Thanks.
Wow, Josie, all of you, thank you so much. Before we get into Q&A, I just want to summarize some of the things I heard all of you say, because one of the things that I like to make sure when I'm involved in Zoom calls like this is that we have actionable items that all of us can leave with and do. And so here's what I heard, and if any of you three want to jump in and add to this, please do. But we talked about supporting the bills that all of these guys have mentioned. How do you find out about them? There are newsletters that you can sign up for. Laura mentioned Achieva. I think JRS has been sending out newsletters on issues that impact people with disabilities. So please reach out to those organizations or us, i.e. JRS, Nancy, or Allison, if you want to get connected to these newsletters, because I think that it matters when you're asked to sign up to support something and you send that email to your senator representative. Aaron, do you agree? I mean, they're looking at the people that are supporting this, and they're realizing it's important when they hear from people. So
Yes,
go ahead.
Oh, I thought you asked me a question. Sorry.
Yeah, no. Do you agree that that those work?
Yes, I do. And Laura, because she's modest, was very self-deprecating, but she's a critical partner because Mike Doyle or Russian Thaler or Toomey or Casey, maybe not so much Casey, but a lot of the people would rather hear from Laura or a constituent than some schmo they don't know who lives outside of Washington. So, I can talk to Mr. Toomey until I'm blue in the face about XYZ bill. But what matters to him most is that I don't vote. So you, in some ways, matter more than I do at the federal level, because you vote for your politicians and you maybe donate some campaign cash. So you are in many ways. And the wonderful JCRC in many ways are more impactful than I am. And I just want to, if I can, really briefly talk about something that Josie said. First of all, I apologize that I stole some of your lines. I was just so taken with your testimony. But I do believe that when you're working with somebody with a disability, I can only speak for myself, but I was nodding along when Josie was talking about trying to pretend not to be disabled, because I experienced as a kid a lot of self-loathing, and as a result, I paid my therapist's mortgage. But but it's really challenging, and because from the moment that somebody looks at me, not when I'm sitting down on a Zoom call, but they see the walker, and they automatically make assumptions, whereas dyslexia or something's awful too, but people don't know that initially. So anyway, I just wanted you to feel, Josie, that you weren't alone, and that to realize that people with disabilities sometimes come with baggage. The last point I want to make is it's a real challenge, Judy, because I once had an able-bodied colleague at my last job who said, I really like working with you because you're smart, you have a great sense of humor, and you're very diplomatic. And most people, I've been in this business 30 years, and most people with disabilities are militant and angry people when I've encountered them. And you're not like that. And I thought I just said, thank you, because what else am I supposed to say? But we have to deal with so much, well, it's a Zoom call, so I'll say adversity, that I think that's, you have to know that somebody's coming with a disability with more baggage than Delta Airlines.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And for those of you who don't know, I'm the mother of a son, a 30-year-old who's got significant disabilities. So while I'm not living with them, I so get some of the things that both you, Aaron, and Josie have mentioned. But back to action for this group, because we've got a great group of people on this Zoom. Laura talked about self-education. So you can do that again by going to some of these websites, connecting with agencies like Jewish Residential Services to be part of the change. Aaron mentioned candidate forums to call out these candidates about issues with disabilities. So, and in the age of Zoom, maybe we all have more opportunities now to do that than ever before if candidates are doing forums on Zoom. We can all look at our synagogues, the businesses we deal with, and look around and say, how inclusive are we? Are we welcoming with people with disabilities? Are they on the boards that we serve on? To bring them to the table. Josie talked about that. So think about that as we go about our day-to-day lives. JDAD, we mentioned that, Jewish Disability Awareness Day on the Hill. We're going to share lots of information on that as it comes to pass. That's in February. And I just want to make a note because we talked a lot about home and community-based services, that HCBS that Aaron was mentioning, that acronym. That's what enables my son to live at home with me, so that I can work and do the things that I do and live a life that gives me some independence, that allows staff in my home, that allows him, if he chose, to go to a day program, that allows people like Josie to live at home with supports. So that is no small thing. And that waiting list that Aaron talked about of 16,000 people, it's real. It's crazy. And yes, in order to get to these services, for example, a service that my son gets, people do have to die in order to get them. And that's a horrible thing to have to say. But it's the honest to God's truth. So we have a few minutes. I'm going to stop there. Does anyone have questions? I didn't see anything in the chat. So we'll just pause for a second. Allison, help me out if you see any hands raised. Does anybody have anything?
Oh, can I just, I want to acknowledge my co-chair of JFNA's Disability Committee, Pittsburgh's own Matt Keller, who used to chair the Jewish Family and Children's Services here in Pittsburgh. So, hey, Matt.
Matt's still involved. He's still
Thanks,
a major
Aaron.
advocate. So, hey, Matt.
Thank you so much for being here tonight, for Aaron and Josie and Laura.
Allison, we've seen any questions? Nancy? Nothing so far?
Well, friends, we're competing against the Steelers game, so maybe people won't get their nachos. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think Allison, Nancy, unless you have anything else to add or comment on, maybe we're at a point where we'll wrap up. But I just want to say I could have listened to all of you for much longer. This was just a little tip of the iceberg on the knowledge, experience, and expertise that you all bring to the table. So I personally want to thank you for everything you do, and just appreciate you all very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you, Judy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Josie. You guys were really engaging speakers. This has been really educational for everybody. So I appreciate your time. And thank you to everyone who was listening. I hope you found it as worthwhile as we did. We will be sending out a brief survey, so please respond to that. It helps us improve future programs. And the other thing was that there was mention of JDAD, but there's also a lot of programming that will take place during the whole month of February. And so be on the lookout for that. We will be sending out information on the co-occurring Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month that will be happening all during February. So lots of other great programming. But thank you again to all of our speakers. You guys are amazing.
Our pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody.